Well, I believe it's about time for us to begin. So glad you all are all here tonight. This is beginning to draw to the end of this series. For those of you who are online, we appreciate your continuing to share in this time together. We have one more session next week. For those of you here, by the way, who were here for Simple Supper, if you see Nathan Green or any of those folks around, be sure and thank them for the work that they've done this semester, trying to make sure that we have that Simple Supper on the first Wednesday night of each month. It's sort of up in the air whether that'll continue next semester, but we'll keep you posted on that as well. Also, there was a little confusion about time, so let me see if I can clear that up. The class time on Wednesday night in this building will switch to 6:30 in January. Okay, so after the holiday break, all of the classes that meet in this building will begin on Wednesday night at 6:30. And that came at the request of a number of people, including teachers of the small children and families who felt like they needed to get their kids home to bed early. So if you'll just make a note of that, about the early in January, there'll be more information, I'm sure, posted to keep us all on the same page there. Okay, we begin tonight with a story about a farmer who was needing some help. And a young man applied for the job, and in the interview, he was asking several questions, the farmer was, and the young man was sort of reticent about what he said, but as he went along, the farmer felt like he could trust the young man and decided to hire him. But the last thing that he had said to him was, "And you can hire me because I can sleep when the wind blows." And the guy didn't know what to make of that, but he just dismissed it and went on. Several nights later, there was a huge storm, and the farmer went to wake up the hand to help him close everything up. No matter what he did, he couldn't get him awake. So he said, "Well, I'll just have to do this myself." And he went out and found all the animals in the barn, found the doors all closed up, found the wagon that had all the hay on it with a tarp over it all battened down. And it came to him at that point what the young man said, that he could sleep when the wind blows because he had taken care of everything that needed to be taken care of before he went to bed. And I thought about that as I was kind of thinking about that story, that's really what we want our kids to do when they leave us. We want them to be able to step into the world prepared, aware, energetic, optimistic. They make a difference in the situations that they're in. And we want to be able, in our own hearts and our own heads, to think we did what we needed to do. We got them in a place to finish strong. And that's kind of the theme around which we'll talk tonight, about how do we finally get to that point where we feel like that's going to be the objective that can be obtained. If we think back over this last 13 or 14 weeks, it began with messengers from God who came to talk to Mary. Gabriel came and sort of gave that vision for the future for Jesus. And then at his birth, the angels come again on God's behalf and make the birth announcement. And you remember that the announcement comes that today in the town of David a Savior has been born to you. He is Christ the Lord. So we have the angel announcement, God's message on the front end. And then we see Jesus, who has stepped out of his divine role into his role as man with us, to identify with us. And we click along for this 33 years that we've looked at, where he as humanity is in a relationship with God his Father, who is divinity. And at the things that God and he have shared along the way that we've tried to draw on as being important for us to teach our own children, to emphasize in the lives of our children. So this goes along for this 33 years, and then we get to his execution, which is where the reading was from last week, and we'll conclude with that reading tonight. But at the execution, there is actually an obituary, not in the sense that we think of it, the long funeral home type, but the centurion who is standing at the cross basically sums up this life. And he says, in more complete terms, The centurion, seeing what had happened, praised God and said, "Surely this was a righteous man." Pretty well summed it all up. We don't always know how the things that we do impact other people because usually that doesn't become apparent until we're gone, and we don't have really the ability to know that. But here is an example of how a man who had no reason to believe, but by observation was able to draw a conclusion that really summed up the life of Jesus, everything that he was. Days later, there's actually this memorial service. Bruce McClarty told me one time, I wrote this down so I wouldn't forget it, I have regretted not going to some funerals, but I have never regretted going to any one that I attended. And I think it's because, when we go to a funeral, we find out a lot of things about people that we didn't know while they were living. We have people who present information that's just new to us. Some funerals they've gone to an open mic, where at some point in the service they just invite. If we were having a funeral here, you would just be invited to come up and make a comment or share a remembrance or something about the deceased. Well, Luke does this, and he ties the time of Jesus on earth between two bookends. Angels on the front end bringing a message, and angels on the back end summing up God's perspective of all that's going on. So tonight, if you want to find the text and read along, Danny's going to read for us like he has faithfully all semester, and Danny, we're appreciative of that. But this will be Acts chapter 1 in the first 11 verses here.
Dear Theophilus, the first book I wrote was about everything that Jesus did and taught. I wrote about the whole life of Jesus from the beginning until the day that he was carried up into heaven. Before this happened, Jesus talked to the apostles he had chosen. With the help of the Holy Spirit, Jesus told the apostles what they should do. This was after Jesus' death, but he showed the apostles that he was alive. Jesus proved this by doing many powerful things. The apostles saw Jesus many times during the 40 days after he was raised from death. Jesus spoke to the apostles about the kingdom of God. One time when Jesus was eating with them, he told them not to leave Jerusalem. Jesus said, "The Father has promised you something. I told you about it before. Wait here in Jerusalem to receive this promise." John baptized people with water, but in a few days you will be baptized with the Holy Spirit. The apostles were all together. They asked Jesus, "Lord, is this the time for you to give the Jews their kingdom again?" Jesus said to them, "The Father is the only one who has the authority to decide dates and times. You cannot know these things, but the Holy Spirit will come to you. Then you will receive power. You will be my witnesses. You will tell people all about me. First, you will tell people in Jerusalem. Then you will tell people in all of Judea, in Samaria, and in every part of the world." After Jesus told the apostles these things, he was lifted up into the sky. While the apostles were watching, Jesus went into a cloud and they could not see him. Jesus was going away, and the apostles were looking into the sky. Suddenly, two men, angels wearing white clothes, stood beside them. The two men said to the apostles, "Men from Galilee, why are you standing here looking into the sky? You saw Jesus carried away from you into heaven. He will come back in the same way you saw him go."
Thank you, Danny. If you'll just kind of hang on to that image here, we're going to work around that. But I want to go to this whole idea of words worth remembering just for a minute. This will bring back memories of a movie that was a blockbuster in 1998, Saving Private Ryan. And you'll remember that there's a significant emphasis through that whole movie about the value of sacrifice. You know, what does it mean when you sacrifice for the benefit or the well-being of someone else? You remember Captain James Miller, who's sent with this squadron to retrieve Private Ryan, who is the last of 4 surviving sons. And the mission is to bring him home because his 3 brothers have already been killed in action. And you remember all of the obstacles of challenges of trying to find him and then to try to get him out back home. And as his captain, James Miller, is dying after being wounded, these are the final words that he says to Private Ryan. He says, "Earn this. Earn it." Really making the point that what we've done, we don't want to be wasted. You know, this was to get you home. So if we get you home, let's make this worth what's happened here. And then you remember in the sort of the conclusion part of that, we see him, Ryan, standing in the cemetery by James Miller's across the tombstone there. And he says these words, "Every day I think about what you said to me that day on the bridge. I tried to live my life the best that I could. I hope that was enough. I hope that at least in your eyes, I've earned what all of you have done for me." Now, if we pick that up and we drop it on the reading that Danny just did for us, you know, here are those final words that come from Jesus himself. He says, you know, "Be my witnesses in Jerusalem, in Judea, and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth." And then there's almost this, make it worthwhile. Make what I've done mean something with this. And then we can almost put ourselves in the position of Ryan to say something like, "Every day I think about what you said that day on the mountain before you left this earth. It wasn't the first time you said it. You made it plain that you expected us to go into all the world and make disciples. I've tried to live my life the best that I could. I hope that was enough. I hope that at least in your eyes, your death on my behalf has been worth it." The value of sacrifice, you know, that gets us to a point that gets us home. Well, Saving Private Ryan, you know, was just was a movie. This comment, this sort of paraphrase here, is really much more significant. You know, when we come down to it, the death and resurrection of Jesus was basically the rescue mission to get us home. It's an example of what it means for us to have to finish strong in order to make it worthwhile. And it's the message that we need to be sure that we're teaching our children. I'm going to change gears here just a minute. You may recognize this man. This is Randy Pausch, who is the author of the book, The Last Lecture. If you know the story of this, Pausch was a professor at Carnegie Mellon University. He was married, the father of 3 children, ages 5, 2, and 1. Many universities, I don't know if Harding does it or not, they have this series at some point in the year called The Last Lecture. And the invitation is, if you're invited to give the lecture, what would you say if this was your last opportunity to speak to whomever is in the audience? You know, how would you sum it up? Sort of like a commencement address in some ways. You know, what is it that you would say? Well, the situation here is a little different because he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer before his invitation came to give the last lecture. So here he is. He knows he has this diagnosis. He knows he has a very limited amount of time to live. And now he's been invited to give the last lecture, which in essence will be his last lecture in reality. So he was going back and forth. Should he give this lecture? Should he not? And his wife asks him, she said, why is this such a big deal? You know, you need to be spending time doing what you need to do. You just have a limited amount of time. And this was his answer. An injured lion wants to know if he can still roar. He just wanted to finish strong. It wasn't ready. It wasn't time to just lay down and be done, with this. So what he decided to do was to preserve for his children what he'd learned from his life. And to include some things that he wanted them to remember. And he didn't want to talk about cancer because, lots of people have cancer. That didn't make him unique. He didn't want to talk about his roles as a son or father or husband or teacher or mentor or whatever roles he had. But this was the conclusion that he came to. He said, my uniqueness, I realized, came in the specifics of all my dreams, from incredibly meaningful to decidedly quirky. They defined my 46 years of life. Now, what are those dreams? This is in his book. It's probably too small to read, but it says, being in zero gravity, playing in the NFL, authoring an article for the World Book Encyclopedia, being Captain Kirk, winning stuffed animals, and being a Disney Imagineer. Now, the book is all about how he pursued all of these things and to some degree or other, either directly or indirectly, was able to achieve them, to be a part of them, which is why he says some of them are quirky and some of them are meaningful. Well, it's one thing to look at that as somebody that we just know by reputation. But there's someone that I was thinking of when I was reading this week that probably deserves his own mention. And that is Brother Howard Norton, who just left us not too long ago, who was another professor and very much a man of dreams. For those of you who knew him well, some of this won't surprise you. For those of you who don't, let me just give you a little snippet. He loved conversation. But he loved conversation best when it was over food. So sometimes you'd get an invitation to go eat with him or whatever, but that's when he loved to talk the most. He never hurried a response to any question. If you ask him something, he just took his time and he was very deliberate with it. He didn't let his emotions get wrapped up in it. Even if he didn't agree, he was very thoughtful, very methodical about how he approached that. And he lived what he taught. Personally, I'm thankful for the late night conversations on the parking lots after meetings, because a lot of times he'd just stand and talk for as long as you were willing to stand and participate. I watched him persevere through his health as it declined. And in many ways, he became an injured lion who still needed to know that he could roar as he went along. And the reason for saying that is he did a lot of roaring. And I didn't know a lot of this in high school. For those guys in here or girls who went to Girl State, he was the governor of Texas Boys State, was elected that. He went to D.C. as a representative. Every state sends two to Boys Nation. He was elected president. When he was at ACU as a senior, he was president of the student body. I mean, that's even before we hit, his really stride in life. And we all know more about his South American missionary work, his role as a preacher, his role as a college professor, his role as an editor, as a writer. But one of his frequent comments was, dream big dreams. And so when Howard Norton said that, there was credibility to that, because he'd had big dreams and he had pursued them, very much like Randy Pausch did. But it is very reminiscent of this guy as well, because that's sort of the Disney mantra. If you can dream it, you can do it. Yeah. So in order to finish strongly, we have to have something that we're looking forward to. We have to have a dream out there that we're pursuing. So when we teach our children well, We need to feed the fire of their imaginations. We need to give them permission to dream, but we need to tether them to reality to some degree. We can ask questions, but we need to give them the resources to find the answers. And when we encourage them to dream, we need to help them understand that whatever they choose to dream, whatever they pursue, is going to determine whether they finish strong. Okay, so that is kind of the background. I read another story about a tourist who was visiting an area which was fairly renowned for its fishing. And he stood there and watched a fisherman who was casting and reeling and casting and reeling. He brought in a pretty good-sized trout, looked at it, threw it back in. A little bit later, he got a pretty good-sized perch, looked at it, put it back. And then he reeled in this, and he looked at it, and he put it in his bucket. And the tourist, who just couldn't stand it any longer, walked down and said, "Why'd you throw the big fish back?" The guy said, "Small frying pan." And so the point in the story is, that we're only going to dream as big as we give ourselves permission to dream. Or our children are only going to dream as big as we help them dream. Sometimes vision casting, though, I doubt that any of us would invite our children in and sit down and we would have this formal discussion and we would say, "Now you tell me your dreams and let me tell you if those are reasonable or not." We just wouldn't do that. What we're going to do is we're going to give it to them in little bits and pieces. We're going to kind of create advice here in little pieces, and we hope it sticks. And then when we get done, when they get done, we've got this really pretty impressive mosaic, that has been put together. How many of you were here Sunday morning? Okay. Was it not amusing to hear the Toddisms? To listen to what the youth group is hearing Todd say, whether he thinks he's saying it that often or not. They called him out, they fed it back, and it was impressive to me because sometimes what we're saying, we're not sure if they're hearing, and sometimes what they're remembering is not always what we are trying to get them to remember. But that was fairly impressive. Randy Posh, who was just up here on the slide, said his dad made a couple of comments along the way that he never forgot. And one of those was, never make a decision until you have to. I don't know, you can think about that one. I'm not sure where that was all going, except not to rush a decision maybe. He also said, just because you're in the driver's seat doesn't mean you have to run over people. Now, there's a lot packed into that statement, and he remembered that. So, you blow that up as time goes on, and you see how that begins to apply other places. Well, I want us to whiteboard this just a little bit here and let you answer this question. What have you said to your children that you know when you say it is going to cause them to roll their eyes? Now, for those of you online tonight, I haven't done a very good job of repeating back what's said, but I'll try to do that tonight. Okay, something that you said that every time you say it, your kids... Yeah, Michael.
Every time we go back to the place where I grew up, I say, none of this was here when I was your age.
Okay, he's saying, none of this was here when I was your age. His wife is rolling her eyes, even at this moment here. So what is it that you hope that they'll take away from that?
Things change, that there's progress, but also enjoy your memories while you have them, because you're not going to go back to the same small town.
Okay, that time moves on and that things change along the way, and enjoy them while you're in the middle of them at the time, for sure. How about somebody else? Yes, sir. Okay, you're going to marry someone you know, so be careful who you pick as friends. Good advice, very pithy. You can remember that, And I suspect you said that more than once. Yeah, so you just reinforce that. Anybody else? Yeah. Leave it better than you found it. And have you said that more than once? Yes.
To work harder on the front end. It's the end of the semester.
The comment was to work harder on the front end, because now at the end of the semester there's a lot of grief because basically that didn't happen. I'll share a couple. One that if you ask my kids, I'm sure this would come up, and it's when they were little, they were whining about being hungry all the time. I'm just starving, and I would say to them, I've seen starving children, and you are not one of them. And that we've said that more times than not. The grandkids would repeat this one. The most important building on a college campus is the library. So they may not know where anything else is on campus, but they know where the library is. So those are a couple of things. But I did a little research on this, asking Andy, Allie, and Anna what they remembered. And these are the three things they said. Anna says, and it's very much like what you were saying a minute ago, Anna said what she remembers is look behind you. Hearing that over and over again, basically to say, your choices are impacting somebody else. So, how did you leave it? What did you do? What did you say? Andy, I was surprised at this one, says, bring it up again and we'll vote on it. Which is, as you know, is a reference to belching in public. And the whole comment there was to sort of emphasize the fact that the way we behave is how people remember us. But that's not the one I would have thought. Allie says, how many legs do you have? That's what she remembers, which was basically, have you done all you can do before you ask me, to help you? So those were the three. But the one that they all agreed on, and this is the one that will be on my tombstone, I'm sure, it was unanimous, is that the job is not done until the mess is cleaned up. So we've sort of drilled that and drilled that and drilled that. And now we're on another generation trying to convince them that that's important as well. So try this question then. If you could have only one more conversation with your parents, what would you ask them to tell you? Now, some of you, like me, you don't have that privilege anymore. You don't get a chance to ask. But if you could, what would you want them to tell you? Anybody? Yes, ma'am. Okay. The comment was to tell family history, basic origins, roots, how I'm connected to them, that sort of thing. Anything else that you've thought, for those of you who've lost parents, that you thought, if I just had one more chance to talk to them, I'd like to know? Yes, ma'am.
My great aunt and my grandmother passed away within the last year, and I remember having a conversation that we knew they were on the end of their life, and what I wanted to hear was just the same stories we heard as kids retold to us, but very similar, to just hear it in their words again.
All right. The comment was to hear it in their words, in their voice, to reinforce the stories that we've heard many, many times, but one more time to be able to embrace that sound. For those of you who, if you're looking for those of us who are older, great Christmas present is to record the book. You can buy the books and read the story in your voice and give it to grandchildren or whomever, and it preserves it that way as well. Anybody else have a thought? Well, Randy Posh, I'm going back to him again, made this comment. He said, all parents want to teach their children right from wrong, what we think is important, and how to deal with challenges life will bring. But we also want them to know some stories from our own lives, often as a way to teach them how to lead theirs, which is really what you just said. That we're trying to either show them the things that are worth repeating or maybe the things that aren't, how that goes. All right, so this is your last lecture. You've been invited to give the last lecture. Will, you and Brad, in the locker room, the championship game's coming up, only this time you're retiring. Okay, this is your last locker room speech. Or for those of you who've been in the armed services, you're the commanding officer. Maybe it's D-Day. Maybe you know there's some people who are not going to come back. You may not come back. What are you going to say? So, if you were asked to give the last lecture and you knew it would be the last advice your children would hear from you, what would you say?
What Moses said, remember what I taught you.
Remember what I taught you. And the credibility for that statement is Moses. Okay? What else? What would you... Somebody? Oh, yes.
So I stole this from somebody. One of the blessings that I say over our children is nothing you do good or bad will ever change how much I love you. And God loves you even more than I do.
Okay. Nothing you do... I'm going to abbreviate here. Okay. Will change how I love you. And God loves you more. Okay. Yes.
The conclusion of the whole matter is fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the whole duty of man.
Fear God and keep commandments. And hasn't that been where we've been working this whole semester to try to get to that? Not only the what, but the how. How do we do that in a way that really sticks? You know, that's absorbed, that's infused. The ultimate desire, really, for all of this is to finish strong. Not only for us to finish strong, but for our kids to finish strong as well. And it's just exactly what's here, to pursue God's will, to follow His lead, to persevere right up to the very, very end. Getting started on this process just takes a split second, but finishing strong takes a lifetime. We're talking about a long run here with this. The Olympics provide great stories of inspiration. This one, some of us in this room will remember the 1968 Olympics in Mexico City. This runner is John Stephen Akwari from Tanzania. And he, not too long into the race, got caught in a group of runners who were jockeying for position, and he went down. He had a big gash in his leg. He smashed his shoulder. He got medical attention. They came over, and then he got back on the track, running much slower than he was whenever he fell. And he finished, but it was an hour after the winner. There were still 2,000 to 3,000 people in the stands waiting for him to finish. And we're cheering him on. It's legendary as far as the crowd response to what he did. One of the interviewers asked him the question, why didn't you just withdraw from the race? There was no chance that you could win this. And this was his reply. My country did not send me 5,000 miles to start the race. They sent me 5,000 miles to finish the race. And that's the story. I mean, that's what we're after with our kids here. And so the question is, what's required to help our children finish strong? How do we get to that point? Well, I'm just going to throw out things. These are not anything new. You know them all. I'll try to tag them to a picture just to make them more memorable here. But one of the first things is that, we have to maintain the speed for the long run. Now, the 100-meter dash is a great event. And if you're Usain Bolt, it's even better. 9:58 is the time. But what does it take to do that? Everything he's got, and then it's over. If life were a sprint, it's a great way to finish. But life is not. Life is the marathon. Now, by comparison, a 100-meter dash versus a marathon is 42,164.81 meters. Okay, so how you run that versus how you run 100 meters is decidedly different, and all of that. The world record, by the way, I think was just set not in October, just a little bit ago, 2 hours and 35 seconds for the marathon. So you can look that up, see, and correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I thought I saw that. One of the problems with the marathon, though, is what's called bonking or hitting the wall. Usually happens about miles 16 to 20, somewhere in that. And if you run, or if you talk to people who run, that's when you wonder why you're doing this. Your head gets fuzzy, your legs get heavy. You think, I don't know why I'm doing this, what's going on. You just kind of want to quit. And that's when it pays to have pacers in the race. Because if you can hook onto someone to run with, who runs the pace that you want to run in order to finish, they can keep you going at about the speed that you need to finish. It allows you, when you do this too, to give up all this, keep up with split times, figure out where I am in the race, how many miles. You just run. You just get behind the pacer and in that group, and you just run. Just relieves you of all of that stress. The other real advantage of doing this, though, is it gives you someone with whom to run. You're not doing it by yourself because you know that there's somebody that's running who has the same objective that you do, to finish at the same time, the same place. Moses, Zach mentioned this a minute ago, he fired the starting gun for the Canaan Marathon. Sent the 12 runners off. They came back and reported. Some of them reported poorly. Some of them reported well. But they wound up running an ultra marathon that now took 40 years to finish before they could cross. But the two who survived that were Joshua and Caleb. They paced each other. They ran together. And they finished the marathon in a very, very strong position. So we want to teach our children, commitment to God is a covenant. It's not a contract. It's relational. It's emotional. There's a lot vested in that decision to run the race toward that objective. The second thing we probably need to talk about is how do we help them stay on course? Okay? Not every competition gives you the opportunity to see the finish line. Probably crewing is more like what we're involved with. You know what I'm talking about, long, sleek boats, team of rowers, all way back to the finish line. They don't know where they are. So who do they depend on? The coxswain sitting in the front of the boat, who can see the finish line, who's giving the call, the orders, the speed. Okay, this is what we have to do. You all stay together with this. Who's giving the commands on how to get to the finish line first, intact, finish the race with this. By the same token, we don't thank you, and we apologize to you guys on the line who probably missed part of this, but 7-Up was looking for a niche to distinguish itself from other soft drinks. So it came out with this ad campaign that was the Uncola, which basically set it apart. You know, from that point forward, it was basically saying we are not a cola. So if we're going to teach our children, you know, hydration issues, then we need to teach them to be distinctively different, not weirdly different, just distinctively different. And so how do you do that? Well, you talk about being unselfish, unpretentious, unconceited, unprejudiced, uncorrupt. They become the Uncolas because that's what we invest in them to help them understand that. And then we help them drink deeply from the water that satisfies their thirst. And we know it exists. Jesus offered it to the woman at the well in Samaria, that once drinking of what he has to offer, you're not thirsty again. You can finish the race. Not a problem at that point. So you want to stay hydrated well enough to cross the finish line. Now, for the coaches in the audience, I'm going to just say I am speaking from very low understanding of all that's required of your job. But I'm going to say this from my observation, that we need to coach them well. I mean, the burden is on us. And it seems to me that the effective coaches are the ones who work out with their players, that they're there with them. And in that sense, that's the way it is with our kids. We don't ask them to do anything that we're not willing to do in the process. And whoever said this before, we have to be sure that they know that we love them. It was Sarah, I think. We have to be sure that we know that they love them. Now, what I have to say may be important, but it doesn't matter a bit if I don't say it in a way that is either memorable or not quickly, cast off as being insignificant. So it isn't everything about what we say, but it has a lot to do with how we say it. And you remember way back we talked about love languages, trying to figure out what the love language is for our children, and then trying to package what we have to say in that. I came across this article, and I started not to put it in here, and I thought this is really good because this is the other perspective. This is written from athletes' perspective, the 5 things that they want from their coaches. So we could plug in from kids, the 5 things that kids would like to have from their parents, if we can make the parallel. Believe in me. Be positive. Be consistent. Lead me. Give me your best effort. Now, normally we think coaches have to come up with all of this about how they're going to approach it. This is a request from athletes, or in our case, maybe from our kids. With that, reminded me of the 3, that we started with back early on. The 3 questions that every student wants answered. Do you like me? Am I worth anything? Will I make it? Same sort of group of questions there. All right, if we're going to offer advice, or we're going to try to instruct them to get them to the finish line, we need to keep it simple, and we need to say it often. There were 2 guys who were talking. One of them says, man, I wish I had listened to my mom. And the other one said, why? What did she say? He said, I don't know, I wasn't listening. So it's that sort of thing of we have to say it in a way that they can hear it. And when I say it often, I mean say it often, but not too often. Not that it begins to make them grind their teeth and roll their eyes all the time, that they just stop listening. This is something, I don't know if you'll find this helpful, but let me share it. This comes from a memory research study. And if you look at the timeline on this, information in that initial period is 100%. I can say something, or you can say something to me and I'll remember it. But at the end of one day, look where it is. It's about 30%. Okay? Look where it is then as the further out you go, or that you lose it, you lose it, you lose it, you lose it. Well, there's a formula called 7-3-2-1, which means if I want to remember it for the long run, I read it today, I read it tomorrow, I read it day after tomorrow, and I read it 1 week from the first day that I read it. And it begins to reinforce this so that I don't lose it, that it doesn't go away. Same sort of thing when we're talking to our kids. You know, we give it to them, and we maybe give it to them close together initially, but then we don't have to give it to them so often all the time that they say, oh, here we go again, you know, with that. And then this. I think we need to let them see us sweat. In 1984, Gillette came up with this advertisement to push their antiperspirant dry idea. The whole idea was that, you know, you were in control if nobody knew you were sweating, whatever the situation was. And that was the tagline that came from that, never let them see you sweat. But, you know, if you're going to run hard, you're going to sweat. You just are. So our kids need to see us sweating our own stuff, living this life well, trying to finish strong, struggling on Heartbreak Hill, you know, pulling on those oars when our arms say, you know, I want to get out of the boat. That they need to see us sweat, so that later on sweating is not such a bad thing. This, we're going to wrap it up here. This is a quotation from John Quincy Adams, 6th president. And someone asked him, he says, well, how are you doing? And Adams says, John Quincy Adams is well, but the house in which he lives at the present time is becoming dilapidated. It's tottering on its foundations. Time and the seasons have nearly destroyed it. Its roof is pretty well worn out. Its walls are shattered and tremble with every wind, and I think John Quincy Adams will have to move out of it pretty soon. But he himself is quite well, thank you. To me, that's a statement of finish strong. You know, there are things crumbling around me. You know, I can't hang on forever in this body, but I want to finish it strong. I want to be able to say in the end that I ran a good race. And that when I cross that line, I hear those words, and I want my kids to hear those words, well done, thou good and faithful runner. You know, that you stayed the course with this. So, for summary tonight, if we teach our children to dream dreams of the finish line, to run with those who know the course, that's the whole comment about choosing friends, to fix their eyes on Jesus who's gone the distance, then we will have taught them well to finish strong. So, as we have done at the close of every one of these, if you have comments, corrections, differing opinions, whatever else, please feel free to just fire them my way. Next week, if all goes well, the plan is to go back over this 13 weeks. I'm going to pull out just 1 or 2 slides from each of those presentations, and we'll just try to tie it all up, sort of that memory curve. You know, we're going to reinforce it one more time, and then we'll be finished. Hope you guys have a great week, and thanks so much for being here. Those of you on the line, we apologize for that little blip with no microphone. You'll have a great week.